That evening, Jerusalem sank into the last light of the day, golden and thin like a fading breath. In the palace courtyard, Isaiah stood in silence, his weathered face reflecting a lifetime of carrying the weight of heaven on his shoulders. Hezekiah walked toward him, and in his eyes was not the look of a king, but of a father sensing that something terrible was about to unfold. Isaiah spoke slowly, his voice heavy with sadness, as if every word had to be pulled from the deepest part of his soul. He said that fate had shown him the vision of his own death, and that this death would not come from war or illness, but from the hands of the very child who had once been raised inside this palace. Hezekiah froze, his hand trembling not out of fear, but out of the pain of a man who knows he cannot protect someone he dearly loves. He asked why a faithful prophet like Isaiah must suffer such a fate. Isaiah lifted his eyes toward the darkening sky, where the faint light seemed to be gathered and taken away by an unseen force. He said that some things belong to the will of heaven, and no human can change them, no matter how much it hurts. In that moment, Hezekiah felt a strange presence, mysterious yet powerful, like the shadow of the beloved, casting a hidden warning upon the earth. The two men stood there, one a king, the other a prophet, and both understood that the path of destiny had opened, leaving no way back. This story begins with sorrow, but the deeper you go, the more you will glimpse the light Isaiah once saw. If you wish to follow this journey to its end, hit like and subscribe, because each chapter ahead will reveal truths that history has kept buried for thousands of years. The last day of Hezekiah's life arrived as gently as a passing breeze, yet it left in him a sorrow as heavy as an orphaned stone. The kind-hearted king who had guided his people through countless dangers now lay on his CCB, not fearing death, but fearing the future that his son might destroy everything he had worked so hard to protect. Manasseh was still young, his eyes hardened like stone, and Hezekiah knew deep in his heart that darkness had crept into the boy long before anyone noticed. He held Isaiah's hand tightly,
his voice so faint.
It sounded like a whisper carried by the wind, asking whether there was any path left to change fate. Isaiah only shook his head, his eyes heavy with the weight of what he had already foreseen. Hezekiah wept, not because he feared dying, but because he felt powerless before destiny. Powerless knowing that his own child would one day drag the kingdom into chaos. In his final breath, he wished for only one simple mercy, that God would protect his people, even as his own heart was preparing to leave this world. Manasseh ascended the throne while still too young, yet his heart had long been claimed by a growing shadow. People whispered that on silent nights in Jerusalem, he often stood alone on the palace rooftop, his empty eyes fixed on a place only he could see. After Hezekiah's death, he changed completely, becoming angry, suspicious, and cold, so cold that no one dared meet his gaze. They said Beliar had found a doorway in Manasseh's soul, a small crack just wide enough for the seed of cruelty to take root. From that day on, Jerusalem slowly turned into a city stripped of light. Sorcery, fortune-telling, and strange rituals of sacrifice spread like poisonous weeds after rain. The cries, echoing through the night, were no longer those of children, but of people forced into darkness against their will. The townsfolk looked at one another in fear, unable to understand how the son of a compassionate king could become someone whose very name made others shiver. But the oldest among them knew the truth. Once darkness chooses a person, the road back is almost impossible to find. Balkira appeared in Jerusalem like a poisoned breeze, gentle yet cold enough to make people shiver. He held no real power, yet his sharp eyes and that half-smile always carried something unsettling. He called himself a man chosen to receive heavenly visions, but every word he spoke reeked of jealousy and bitterness. For a long time, Bulkaira had watched Isaiah from the shadows, envying the respect the people gave the gentle prophet. And when Manasseh began sinking into darkness, Bulkaira saw his chance. He whispered into the young king's ear accusations crafted like traps, claiming that Isaiah opposed Jerusalem, claiming that he dared to say he had seen the face of God, something even Moses never dared to declare. Manasseh, already consumed by suspicion, did not need much convincing to believe such venom. From that moment, Bulkaira became the small spark that would ignite the ruin of Isaiah's fate. Before anyone understood what was happening, a death sentence had already begun to take shape, drawn silently by the treacherous tongue of this false prophet. Isaiah and the faithful fled into the desert, like shadows swept away from their former lives. For 2 long years, they survived among burning dunes where the nights pierced like needles and the days were so hot even breath felt dry. No homes, no voices, only the endless sky above and a silence heavy enough to feel like a warning. Each morning they gathered a few wild leaves to stay alive, and each evening they shared tiny sparks of hope to keep their hearts from breaking. Isaiah always walked at the back, his body thin but his eyes strangely bright, as if seeing something far beyond human understanding. Sometimes the disciples asked whether God was still watching over them. Isaiah only smiled gently and said that silence can also be an answer. And in that harsh wilderness where everything seemed determined to break a person's spirit, they discovered a quiet strength to endure, for they believed the greatest trials always
come just before the light returns.
One quiet night in the desert, when even the wind seemed to hold its breath, Isaiah gathered his disciples around a small fire flickering weakly in the sand. He told them it was time to hear what heaven had shown him long before they fled Jerusalem. His voice was low and steady, as if he were reading from pages of destiny already written. He spoke of a child who would be born not in a golden palace, but in a humble home where love alone served as blanket and roof. This child would grow up in quiet humility, yet in his eyes would shine the light of the one who shaped the heavens themselves. Isaiah said he would heal the sick, lift the brokenhearted, and restore hope to those who believed their inner flame had died. But then, this very one would be handed over, nailed to a wooden beam like a criminal, and his blood would fall to the earth like red dew, signaling the sorrow of heaven itself. Isaiah gazed into the darkness as he spoke of the third day, when he would rise again, not to display power, but to open the path that leads humanity back to true light. The disciples grew silent as Isaiah reached the final part. He said that after the beloved ascended, the church would slowly change its color. Those entrusted with the flame would sometimes lose themselves. Greed would creep into teachings, and power would obscure the human heart. Yet Isaiah emphasized that his light would never disappear, even if hidden by temporary shadows. What mattered most was that there would always remain a few, no matter how few, who kept their faith pure like the first raindrop of a new season. And it was they who would keep the world from being swallowed whole. Isaiah looked at his disciples and told them that a day would come when humanity would tremble before a king believed to be sent by heaven, though in truth, he would only be the shadow of Beliar, wearing human skin. He spoke of a man whose smile radiated power, who walked among the crowds like a false light, yet inside carried an abyss of cruelty. Later generations would call him Nero, a name that spread farther than any flame he ever set. Isaiah said this man would perform signs that seemed like miracles, deceiving the weak-hearted and gathering followers from even those who once swore loyalty to the light. He would raise monuments to his own power, force nations to kneel and proclaim himself divine. But the most terrifying thing was that he would hunt those who kept their faith pure, chasing them like a hunter stalking prey in a midnight forest. The disciples shuddered, not because of the name Nero, but because they realized that history could be bent by a single man whose heart had been completely overtaken by darkness. Isaiah warned that the day would come soon, when greed and fear would push people into the hands of the deceiver, and shadows would cover the sky. One late afternoon, as the group sat together in silence, the sky suddenly shifted in a strange way, as if someone had lightly touched the surface of water and sent an invisible ripple across the heavens. Isaiah rose to his feet, and in his eyes gleamed a light that made anyone who saw it shiver. A deep, resonant sound echoed from above, not thunder, but the voice of another realm calling his name. Those around him heard the sound clearly, yet saw absolutely nothing. They whispered to one another, wondering if the wind had changed or if the earth had breathed too loudly, but Isaiah was staring into empty space, where he alone saw a door opening, growing wider as though inviting him in. He took a small step forward, then seemed to be lifted out of the earthly world, his body growing weightless while his mind stretched beyond what any human could endure. The disciples called out to him in fear, but Isaiah did not turn back, for his ears had already caught the invitation from the higher realms. An invitation meant only for the chosen. And in that moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath, and everyone understood that what they were witnessing no longer belonged to this world. Isaiah felt his body grow lighter, like morning mists, lifted gently by the wind. As he rose from the earth, the light pouring out from the heavenly door washed over him. So bright he had to squint, yet tender like a mother's hand resting on her child's forehead. In the first heaven, he saw countless angels standing in long rows like warriors guarding peace. They bowed as he passed, their wings spreading waves of shimmering light. Ascending to the second and then the third heaven, he heard choirs unlike any earthly song, melodies flowing like clear streams into the heart, dissolving every weight within him. At the fourth heaven, the souls of the righteous shone like small stars, each carrying its own story sorrow. Hope, longing and all were turned toward a greater light above. When Isaiah reached the fifth heaven, he saw Enoch, the one God took away without tasting death. Enoch stood waiting with a gentle yet powerful presence, like an elder brother welcoming a long-lost kin. He nodded at Isaiah, and in that glance Isaiah felt a reassurance so warm, he no longer felt alone. In the sixth heaven, light grew so radiant that no shadow could survive. The angels here spoke no words, yet their silence held a force that made Isaiah bow his head in awe. They placed their hands on his shoulders, and instantly, his countenance changed, glowing as if wrapped in a sacred veil of light. Finally, he entered the seventh heaven, where human words became too small to hold what lay before him. There stood Abel, surrounded by cascading brilliance, his face no longer marked by the pain of his murder, but calm as morning dew. And behind them, the great glory shone with a radiance Isaiah dared not look at directly, an overwhelming brilliance that did not burn, but instead cleared the soul like the first sip of water from the village well. Isaiah fell to his knees, trembling with both fear and joy, knowing he had stepped into a realm humans only dream of in their deepest sleep. As Isaiah knelt before the overwhelming radiance of the seventh heaven, a movement as soft as a passing breath made him lift his head. He saw the beloved approaching, his face gentle yet so deep that the human heart could feel both warmth and trembling at the same time. Isaiah asked why someone with the power to illuminate all of heaven would choose to hide his true form when descending into the world. The beloved looked at him with eyes carrying the knowledge of ages and said that if the angels recognized him while he moved through the heavens, they would not bear the thought that the Most High could appear in a form. like theirs. And more than that, every plan to save humanity would collapse the moment his identity was revealed. Isaiah understood then that the beloved had to resemble each order of angel in every heaven, had to conceal his own light, had to walk through the heavenly realms clothed in absolute humility so no one, not even the celestial army, would recognize him. But what moved Isaiah most was the beloved's quiet confession that his love for humanity was so great that he will lead his own glory, choosing to come to earth in the simplest human form. When the beloved returned from that arduous descent, the angels were stunned. They bowed low, not out of fear, but out of a trembling reverence that made even their wings quiver. They asked one another how the glorious one had walked among them like an ordinary angel without their praises thundered through the heavens, and Isaiah stood there, witnessing the moment the entire celestial realm burst open in wonder as the most sacred secret was finally revealed. In a small house on the edge of Bethlehem, the night was so still that one could hear the wind slipping through the wooden slats. Mary sat leaning against the wall, her hands resting on her belly, as if holding a secret she herself did not fully understand. Joseph sat nearby, anxious but helpless, praying in silence because it was the only thing he knew to do. Then suddenly the room filled with a gentle light, soft as morning mist, not blinding yet powerful enough to steal their breath. There was no cry of pain, no heavy breathing, and absolutely no sound of a newborn's wail. The child appeared so quietly it was as though he had been placed into Mary's arms by an unseen hand. Joseph stared wide-eyed, his heart pounding as he realized what he was witnessing was beyond anything he had ever heard in stories. Mary looked at the child, her face glowing as if touched by a holiness words could never describe. Outside, the sky remained dark, but within that humble room, silence itself became the clearest sign that heaven had opened its door, delivering a life to the world in the gentlest way imaginable. The years he walked among humanity were filled with miracles, yet also shadowed by doubt. He healed the sick, raised the lame to their feet, opened the eyes of the blind. But the more miracles he performed, the more fiercely darkness tried to surround him. Then came the day he was handed over like a criminal, dragged through the streets amid the shouts of the crowd, while many who had once been saved by him stood silently, too afraid to lift their heads. When the cross was raised, the world itself seemed to sink. With every blow of the hammer piercing his hands, Isaiah said the entire heavens trembled, as if the angels could not bear to witness the one they worshipped being treated this way. When he breathed his last, the earth quaked. Night fell sooner than it should, and everyone nearby felt as though a piece of the world had broken away. But his spirit was not held by the darkness. He stepped into Sheol, the deepest realm of shadow, and with nothing more than his presence, the chains binding countless souls shattered like ash. And on the third day, he rose as quietly as the first morning light creeping across a meadow. When he ascended back through the heavens, the angels fell to their knees all at once. They trembled not from fear, but from a reverence so overwhelming their wings seemed unable to stay still. They whispered among themselves that they had not known him when he descended, that they never realized the glorious one had taken on human flesh and endured the depths of suffering out of pure love. Isaiah stood silent, watching the entire celestial realm tremble like an ocean of light bowing before the most sacred truth ever revealed. The final day of Isaiah's life arrived on a morning. It seemed perfectly ordinary, with the sky still painted in a soft blue, as if unaware of what was coming. When Manasseh's soldiers came to seize him, the disciples panicked and tried to help him escape. But Isaiah gently placed a hand on their shoulders. He told them that there are paths a person does not choose, yet must walk with calm acceptance. As he was taken to the place of judgment, Isaiah did not resist or offer a word of complaint. He simply lifted his eyes to the wide sky above, the same sky that had once opened to reveal the most sacred visions to him. In his gaze there was no fear, only the quiet peace of a man who knew he had fulfilled his purpose. Witnesses later said that as Isaiah bowed his head for his final prayer, a soft beam of light descended from above, resting on him like a garment of peace. Even those who did not believe in him felt their hearts sink at the sight of such extraordinary composure. And when he finally closed his eyes, the air itself seemed to fall still, leaving behind the sense that he had not departed this world, but simply stepped into another realm where he once saw was waiting for him.